In the modern world, 25-degree O'Hare sounds like a bit cold, maybe just an extra jacket. But to medieval people, it wasn't a number. It was the threshold where the cold finally had enough time to gnaw at every brick, every straw, every breath inside the house, slow and patient like a predator that knows its prey will weaken eventually. 25-degree fata didn't freeze you. It eroded you, hour by hour. When night fell, wind slipped through any gap it could find. The damp earth pushed cold upward from below. The roof tightened as it dried. Timber walls cracked without a sound, and the glowing embers in the hearth slowly dimmed. There was no dramatic blizzard screaming outside, no violent gust tearing the roof off, just the temperature inside dropping little by little until your fingers went numb, your lips split, and your breath hovered in the air like a thin, white veil. That gentle cold was the one medieval families feared most, because it only needed one mistake: a door not fully latched, a smoke vent set the wrong way, a straw ash floor not compressed before bed. Just one forgotten detail could doom an entire family for the night. And that is the moment when their 12 strange but brilliantly effective anti-cold inventions stepped in. The building tricks, heating methods, and nightly operating rituals that, if used correctly, could still keep a living space comfortable even at 25-degree Fahrenheit today. Before we dive into each secret, ask yourself this. If you were thrown into a night like that, would you stay calm and wise enough to relearn what medieval people once mastered? Or wouldn't you? In any medieval home sitting in 25-degree Fahrenheit winds, the first detail that surprises modern people isn't the turf roof or the thick earthen walls. It's the fact that the floor sits lower than the ground outside. They deliberately sank the interior so that the moment you stepped in, you dropped into a layer of air that was more stable, calmer, and most importantly, out of reach of the wind's attack. Medieval builders understood a simple truth. Fire always loses to wind, but earth does not. So they turned the surrounding soil itself into thermal armor, letting that semi-subterranean floor hold warmth even after the fire had faded into glowing embers. The brilliance lies in how little technique it required. Just a modest depth was enough to weaken the wind, stop cold air from finding its way downward, and trap whatever heat the family had produced throughout the day. In that lowered space, you feel a kind of quiet that's hard to describe, as if the house has pulled itself just deep enough into the ground to slip out of winter's line of sight. And the most fascinating part is that this primitive system still works perfectly today. Lower the floor a little, block the wind a little, and suddenly the room stays warm without burning a single extra stick of firewood. Among all the protective layers, medieval people relied on to survive 25-degree fun. Nights. The turf roof is the one modern viewers misunderstand the most. From a distance, it looks like nothing more than a mound of grass, maybe even primitive or outdated. But the truth flips that assumption entirely. The turf roof was a natural insulation system, so thick and so effective that many engineers today still struggle to create a version that is equally cheap, durable, and environmentally friendly. Each roof was built from multiple layers: compacted earth that held heat, interwoven grass roots that acted as reinforcement, and an organic upper layer that worked like a trap for warm air. And here comes the twist. When snow fell, people assumed it made the house colder. But snow on a turf roof wasn't the enemy. It was a perfect white blanket. That thick layer of snow turned the roof into a natural thermal dome, blocking wind, locking in heat, and keeping the interior warm for hours, even after the fire had gone out. On a 25-degree night, when wind howled through the valley but the turf roof stood still and silent like a small hill, you could feel a simple truth. Medieval people didn't just resist the cold. They used winter to protect themselves. It's a kind of thinking we often forget in an era of industrial materials. If one day you had to design a simple shelter in deep winter, what would you choose? A thin metal sheet, or a roof of earth and grass like our ancestors once used? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective might reveal an entirely new way to understand these ancient structures that look rough, yet were astonishingly sophisticated. In 25-degree cold, the medieval earth straw ash wall wasn't just a barrier against rain and wind, it behaved like a living organism, slow breathing, moisture balancing, and temperature regulating in ways modern materials can barely imitate. Compressed earth formed a stable thermal mass. Straw wove through it like veins holding pockets of warm air, and ash locked moisture while blocking cold drafts from slipping in. When all three worked together, the wall became a thermal shield that reacted to the weather itself. By day, it absorbed whatever warmth came from the hearth and the sun. By night, it released that warmth gradually, keeping humans and livestock in a zone of quiet survival. But here's the tension. As resilient as the system was, it was also extremely sensitive to tiny mistakes. A crack as thin as a hairline, caused by dry winds or shifting soil, could let the day's stored heat escape within hours, turning a safe home into a cold, biting wind box. That's why medieval families ended each night by inspecting the walls, patching cracks with fresh, wet earth or new ash, almost as if they were caring for a fragile but loyal creature. What's fascinating is that this breathing wall principle is still used by ecological architects today, because it naturally balances insulation and humidity control without forcing the building to fight itself. And once you understand how finely tuned this system truly was, you realize something important. Surviving the cold isn't just about generating warmth. It's about learning to read the smallest signals your home gives you, the way medieval people once did. On a 25-degree night, when the hearth dwindled to fading embers and the last traces of warmth thinned out, medieval families didn't let the smoke escape freely the way we do today. They intentionally kept a portion of it lingering just beneath the roof, forming an invisible blanket that held the heat inside for several more precious hours. That smoke layer worked like a natural thermal membrane. It slowed the descent of cold air, trapped the leftover warmth rising from the embers, and reduced heat loss through the loose thatch above. But this was also where tension lived. Open the vent too wide, and the smoke vanished, taking the heat with it in an instant. Close it too much, and the thickening layer of smoke sagged downward, making the entire household struggle to breathe. Medieval people had to adjust the vent almost instinctively, reading the wind's direction, watching the color of the smoke, listening to the faint hiss along the roof to know when to open a finger width more or when to close it by half a hand. It was a fragile balance between safety and warmth, maintaining just enough of that thermal veil while keeping the air breathable through the long night. And here comes the part that shocks modern minds. The very thing we consider dangerous, smoke, became a survival tool in a 25-degree winter. When you witness how precisely they managed it, you begin to understand that survival wasn't always about strength. Often, it depended on adjusting one tiny detail that determined the fate of an entire night. On a 25-degree night, in the dark quiet of a medieval home, something almost invisible played a far greater role in survival than most people today ever imagine. The straw ash floor. It wasn't just a surface to walk on. It was a hidden thermal vault, quietly absorbing every trace of warmth during the day and releasing it back into the house once night settled in. The straw beneath formed tiny air pockets that worked as natural insulation, while the ash above absorbed moisture and blocked the cold rising from the ground. When you stepped on it, you didn't feel heat, and that's the strange part. But stand there long enough, and you'd realize the floor wasn't cold either. It held a thin, soft warmth, like the slow breath of a sleeping creature watching over the family. The secret is that this system required no fire to function. Even the faintest warmth from daylight or dying embers was enough for the floor to capture and release gradually, preventing the home from slipping into bone-deep cold. But that subtle magic came with its own risks. If the straw became too damp or the ash layer was disturbed the wrong way, the entire thermal memory collapsed, letting ground cold surge upward like an underground tide, dropping the indoor temperature within hours. That's why medieval families compressed the floor each night, not to clean it, but to wake up the heat machine sleeping beneath their feet. And if you've ever dismissed humble materials like ash or straw, share your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe a floor like this could truly save a family on a 25-degree night? Your perspective might just open another small legend about ancient intelligence. In 25-degree cold, where wind can slip through any gap and warmth fades faster than a sigh, medieval people understood something modern folks often forget. Livestock weren't just assets. They were living heaters. Every cow, every goat, even a flock of sheep gave off a steady stream of warmth through the night, raising the temperature around them by a few crucial degrees. And those few degrees were often the line between safety and danger. That's why barns were built right against the house, or even shared a wall with it, allowing that natural heat to drift into the living space. Here's the twist. Losing a cow meant losing an entire night's heat, not because of its economic value, but because the home's thermal balance broke instantly. The house grew colder, the straw ash floor couldn't store enough warmth, and the family faced a far harsher night than usual. This is why medieval people cared for their animals not just out of duty, but with tactical vigilance. Shielding the barn from wind, checking the doors every evening, making sure the bedding stayed dry to preserve every bit of heat. They saw their livestock as part of their heating system, a quiet thermal brigade working behind an earthen wall. Looking back, it's clear their mindset wasn't primitive at all. It was the art of turning every available resource, even living creatures, into allies. And if you found yourself in a 25-degree night like that, do you think you'd start seeing the warmth of a single cow differently? Share your thoughts in the comments. On a 25-degree night, when every breath turns to mist, medieval people understood that sleep wasn't just rest. It was a survival tactic. They never slept apart, because even a few handspans of distance could scatter their shared body heat and leave the whole group shivering till dawn. Instead, they formed a sleep cluster, a tight formation where each person became a source of warmth for the next. Children and the elderly were always placed at the center, the warmest point. The stronger adults slept around them, forming a human shield that blocked drafts and stabilized the group's temperature. What's fascinating is that this formation wasn't fixed. They rotated positions depending on the night, the wind, or who needed more warmth. Like a silent army adjusting its formation on a frozen battlefield. And here's the small twist. Sleeping in the wrong spot could be more dangerous than walking outside in the snow. Hypothermia crept in quietly, and by the time anyone noticed, it was often too late. Looking at this level of calculation, you realize survival didn't come from individual strength. It came from merging into a system sharpened by hundreds of winters. So, if you were placed inside a medieval sleep cluster, where do you think you'd be positioned? Share your thoughts. Your answer might reveal how you face the cold and the world. In 25-degree half cold, wind wasn't just moving air. To medieval people, it was a silent invader, capable of slipping through openings too small for the eye to catch. That's why their architecture was never simply built to stand. It was built to control the wind. Doors were always low, forcing anyone who entered to bow down. This wasn't just cultural or practical, it was strategic. The moment you ducked under the threshold, the wind lost its momentum, as if hitting an invisible trap. Narrow corridors, offset walls, and angled corners acted as draft traps, forcing the wind to twist, break, and bleed energy long before it could reach the living space. But here's the climax. Even a gap, the width of a finger, could drop the room temperature by several degrees in just 10 minutes. This isn't an exaggeration. Medieval families had seen it happen so many times that checking for drafts became instinct. Every evening they inspected each timber joint, every seam in the roof, every dry patch of earth, as if preparing a fortress before battle. And this is where their subtle show-off lived, not in decoration, but in strategy. They didn't let the wind decide the fate of their home. They redirected it, confused it, weakened it. The simplicity of the structures hides a philosophy many modern architects still marvel at. If you control the wind, you control the winter night. So tell me, if you had to live in a house like that, where do you think you'd spot the first draft? Share your thoughts. It's fascinating how differently we see what medieval people once considered life or death details. When a 25-degree Fahrenheit settles in and the valley sinks into a thin, blade-like mist, medieval families entered the most important phase of their entire day, the operation ritual. A winter checklist no household was ever allowed to skip. No bells, no reminders. Just a silent choreography repeated across centuries. They compressed the straw ash floor to wake the thermal memory beneath their feet. They adjusted the smoke vent to the precise width needed to keep the warm veil in place while still allowing clean air to circulate. They inspected the earthen walls for any new crack, sealing it before the wind could slip through. They checked every door seam, every roof joint, ensuring no stray draft would creep in while the family slept. And finally, they passed by the livestock stall to confirm their living heaters were safe. Because losing even one cow meant the house would drop in temperature more than anyone could afford. Here comes the soft hook. Medieval people didn't defeat winter because they were strong. They survived because they never forgot a single step. That ritual wasn't superstition, wasn't habit. It was a mindset that carried them through countless nights where one mistake could cost everything. And looking at that precision, we're forced to ask ourselves, In an age of convenience, do we still have that same discipline, that same attention to detail? If you had to live one night following this medieval checklist, which step do you think you'd perform best? And which one would you forget first? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this journey made you see winter through a different lens, don't forget to subscribe for more hidden survival stories from the past.